Recording has begun.
All right. Excellent. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Everybody online can hear?
Yep.
Excellent. Who did the reading? Excellent. One? Just one? All right. We still got a few more lectures for exam one to see how well the readers do on the exam. And I'm going to start off by just saying here, again, this phylogenetic tree. Here's where we started. We talked about these ostracoderms and these extinct fishes and the agnathans, the hagfish and the lampreys last time. And today now we're going to talk about gnathostomata. Primarily we're going to talk about holocephali, the rat tails, and the elasmobranchi, the strap gills, which are together called chondrichthyes. And so these are the sharks, rays, and skates. And so this is where we are today talking about these fishes here. They had jaws, but they do not have bone. We'll talk about that. So this is where we are on this tree. So I'd like to talk about the reading for a minute. And so in the reading, it talks about the largest sharks. The megatooth shark, which a lot of times people call it by its specific epithet. It's Carcharodon megalodon. So a lot of times people just call it the megalodon. And it's probably the largest shark to ever live. And so your reading has this figure in it, this graph right here, where you can estimate the size of a megalodon based upon what we know about great white sharks. And that's because they're very closely related, right? So the great white is the current living relative of the megalodon or the megatooth shark. And these points on this graph here are some data points that I plotted out for teeth that I actually have. So like this one, right? These are pretty good sized sharks. This one here, and then this one here. And for those people at home, that's about the size of my palm is what that tooth is. And so you can get these out on the coast, actually. That's where I got these, is out in Aurora, so Beaufort County, North Carolina. A lot of these were divers, had collected these from offshore Charleston, South Carolina. And what you can do is if you take one of these teeth, like this one here that I'm holding, it's not even one of the bigger ones. If you measure where the enamel starts here to the tip, and a lot of these teeth are broken, so you sort of have to extrapolate out. But if you measure from the level of that enamel to the tip of where that tooth would have ended, some of them are better than others. Like that one there, you can see the point. You can plot it out on a figure here based upon what's known about great white shark teeth and their length. So this is tooth A, goes all the way out here. So the tooth enamel height for this one was 110 millimeters, which then gives us a 12-meter fish. So that tooth came from a fish that was 12 meters long. So to put that in perspective, here is a person swimming. Here is like the largest great white shark ever recorded. 12 meters is there. So twice as long as the largest great white shark ever known. That tooth came from it. I'm holding it in my hand. It's crazy. This one here was even bigger. This one here is probably more out here on the 15-meter length, which was, they say, the lower average size for a megalodon. So this is probably from an adult, whereas this other one came from a juvenile. Wasn't even fully grown. So these sharks were huge. The largest recorded ones, they believe, were somewhere here on the 20-meter long length, which is like probably about 3 or more times bigger than the currently largest great white shark ever known. And so here is an example of the largest great white shark caught in Taiwan, May 1997. 7 meters, 23 foot, 5,500 pounds. And that's like the Guinness Book of World Record shark right there. And you can sort of see how big its mouth is compared to a person. And those things are nothing compared to these, right? So imagine that, a fish that big.
Hey, Ben,
Around.
you're not sharing the slides on Zoom.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on a second. Sorry about that. There. So let's start back off. Here's a tooth. If you measure from the enamel down to where the tip of that tooth would be, you measure the enamel height. And you then plot that out based upon what's known about current great whites, which are only about right here. This tooth, for instance, falls on the graph here, 110 millimeters enamel height, which then gives us a 12-meter fish. And so these are some of the other teeth that I've measured here that are smaller. This fish here is only 6.5 meters. That one's 8. And then we look here at a picture of a person. This is the largest great white ever recorded, right there, about 6 meters, 7 meters. A 12-meter fish is here. Twice as long as the largest recorded great white. And some of these larger teeth I got are 15 meters, like that. So these are very large fish. And so to give you context then about what the largest great white shark here caught in 1997 from Taiwan. 7 meters, 23 feet long, 5,500 pounds. Look at the size of the head on this thing compared to these people standing here, right? It's a big fish. And these megalodons, they made this thing look small. So they were massive. And the point being is when we talk about how Jaws allowed this to happen, this is what we're talking about. We say big, we mean big. So the Jaws here is what allowed a lot of this to happen. So everyone saw that. You guys can see now online. Excellent. But I gave you this handout. If you ever get a megalodon tooth, the reading has this in here, and there's a place where it explains this on page 210 in the reading. And so you can measure how long the shark was that your tooth came from using this equation. Pretty cool. So that is the handout there having to do with the reading. So any questions there? Because we will go into the lecture now. Can everyone see this? Online?
Yep.
Excellent. All right. So here we go. Class Chondrichthyes. Chond means cartilage. Ich means fish. So the cartilage fishes. Now, there are 4 primary characters here. The first is that they are purely cartilaginous endoskeleton. There is no true bone. Now, I spent last week telling you the earliest fishes, these ostracoderms, they had these heavily armored bony shields hanging around on the bottom eating muck. The first fishes had bone. It's a derived characteristic then for the chondrichthyan fishes to lose that bone. So sometimes people erroneously say the sharks are they're more primitive because they don't have bones. Well, no, bones came first. The sharks decided to lose the bones. And part of the reason is one of the first things they did when they got jaws is they decided they could eat stuff, and the bones made them heavy and slow. And they wanted to be fast like predators, fast and mobile. And so they got rid of the bone so to make themselves more agile and better predators. So it's a derived characteristic. They have dermal denticles, which we talked about a little bit last time. These are also called placoid teeth. They literally are teeth. So not only do these things have teeth in the mouth, they're covered entirely with teeth. So they really are predators in that sense. Another characteristic is claspers. You know, the males use this to fertilize the females. Unlike most fishes, the chondrichthyan fishes have a lot of live births, and they also have a lot of internal fertilization. So this is a unique characteristic then for the chondrichthyes. And these claspers are the male intermittent organ is used to fertilize the females. And so, like, for instance, here's a female shark. There is no clasper here. Here's a male shark. You can see these claspers. They're modifications of this anal fin. So when you look at a shark, you can tell the gender very easily based upon the presence of claspers or the absence. They also have very well-developed pectoral and pelvic fins. So we talked about hagfish that just tumble around on the bottom of the ocean. No dorsal fins. The lampreys have some kind of rudimentary dorsal fins, but these things here have very fully formed fins that they use then for swimming. And so these things are very fast and agile in the water. Other characteristics of chondrichthyes, they actually urea in the blood, and they do this for osmoregulation. And we'll talk about that later. Most aquatic animals produce nitrogen waste products in the form of ammonia. The sharks actually use urea because it's a little bit less toxic, and it also allows them to osmoregulate. And we'll talk about that later when we talk about how fishes function. Another characteristic is there is no esophageal diverticulum. All right, that's just fancy way of saying there's no lungs or swim bladders. And in more advanced fishes, these are either used to breathe air or they're used to regulate buoyancy. Chondrichthyes do not have these. They have a two-chambered heart, like most other fishes. There is a notochord in the adult. So we talked about notochords in the lancet Amphioxus. And they have a very well-developed electrosensory system. Now, we sort of see this a little bit going on in the Agnatha. So the lampreys, for instance, have a lateral line to some extent. But these things have a very sophisticated electroreception in the head in particular. They can detect electric currents. And we'll talk about that. And then the first fishes had bone. And so the cartilage skeleton here is degenerate, really meaning that they got rid of it by choice. It did not suit them, and so they got rid of it. So these are the major characteristics there for class chondrichthyes. That includes subclass holocephali, which means the whole heads. These are called chimeras, or the rat tails. They got this little rat-like tail. Hold on a second here. This rat-like tail. And then subclass elasmobranchi. Elasmo, elastic. Bronch is gill. The elastic gills are the strap gills. These are the sharks, the rays, and the skates. And so these are our chondrichthyan fishes here. So these are the major characteristics of that group. Any questions there? All right. So let's look at some general characteristics. And I know this is a shark here. It's quite a bit different than a stingray, but we'll talk about stingrays later. But let's just look at the general anatomy of a chondrichthyan fish with a shark as an example. Large size. We opened up by talking about megalodons. They can get pretty big. Highly mobile, predatory, right? These two sort of go together. And that's because they got rid of the bone. They're very lightweight, very maneuverable, built like a rocket. These things can swim very quickly. And so that was an adaptation there in addition to getting these jaws. Internal fertilization. And so if we look at the back here, we see that where the claspers would be here in the modified fins for the males. They have precocial young with direct development. So remember, the lamprey has an ammocoete larval stage, and most other fishes have a larval stage. Chondrichthyes do not. A lot of times these guys develop, when they hatch or come out of the female with a live birth, they're ready to go. They have teeth and they're taking care of themselves. The direct develop meaning that they come out like a miniature adult, just like the hagfish. And so a lot of these things are internal fertilization, and they come out ready to go. Non-visual senses, again, electrical reception here in the head, and also they have a well-formed lateral line down the side of their body. They can actually feel sound, if you will. And we'll talk about that later when we talk about sensory systems. But they have a lateral line, so they don't have to necessarily see you or smell you. They can feel you moving, and they can actually feel your muscles contracting because they generate slight electrical currents. They don't need to have eyes and a nose to find you. Slow evolving. These things look pretty much like this since that first chart I showed you back before the Devonian. These things pretty much haven't changed. They're almost all exclusively marine, saltwater, with few exceptions. Bull sharks, for instance, you can tolerate fresh water, but most of these things are marine. Low fecundity. Whenever you see internal fertilization, it usually is paired with low fecundity because there's a pretty high investment here. And so I would call this a K-selected species, like in ecology. So that means they don't have very many offspring, but the offspring they do have a very good chance of survival because they're ready to go. Slow growing and maturing. So it takes these things a long time to reach sexual maturity, which is often why shark fisheries have a hard time rebounding because they are slow to mature. And they do have this spiracle. So remember I talked last time about Romer's hypothesis. You have this fourth gill arch out here forming this hyomandibular cartilage, and the third gill arch then forms the jaws. And there's a spiracle right here between the two. So the shark can take water in, pass it over its gills and out, or it can take water in, pass it through the spiracle, and sometimes they actually can bring water in through the spiracle and out through the gills. So this is part of respiration. And so a lot of sharks or a lot of chondrichthyes have a spiracle here. Sometimes they don't, and that's usually a key feature. Like a family, if it doesn't have that, that's something to remember. Other things to look at here. Gill openings, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, some chondrichthyes have 6, some can have 7, lampreys have 7. These things typically have 5. Bony fishes have only 4 gill arches on each side. And so chondrichthyes have 5, other bony fishes have 4. So that's usually a major characteristic here for sharks. Also, they have very well-formed fins, and in many cases, modified pectoral fins, like in the case of the stingrays. And in the sharks, they have what's called a heterocircle tail. Heterocircle meaning that one lobe is longer than the other. In this case, it's oftentimes the upper lobe that's longer. Some sharks, like the great white, has an isocircle tail, which means both lobes are the same length. And believe it or not, that's one of the main characteristics of the great white. And so always so you can pay attention to the tails, or the technical term, the caudal fin of the shark or the fish. So that's some basic anatomy. Any questions there? So let's talk about scales. Placoid scales. Now these are found in the sharks. Look at this. This is a cross-section of a placoid scale. They're called dermal denticles. Dermal meaning skin, and denticle meaning tooth. Skin teeth. This thing is containing enamel and dentine and has pulp in it with a nerve. It's a tooth. They just happen to be covering the skin. So they are literally analogous to a mammalian tooth. Chondrichthyes have these as their base form of scale. And anyone who's touched a shark, these things are rough, right? I mean, it feels just like touching something that was covered in teeth. They're very rough. And so the sharks have these as one of their characteristics, a placoid scale or a dermal denticle. Now, when we talk about other types of scales, we have what's called a ganoid scale. This is found in the gars. And what is this? Would anyone like to take a chance at pronouncing this word? Now, I'm going to warn everybody, there's no profanity allowed. What is this?
Bike ears.
Yes, we got it both online and remote simultaneously. Excellent. Bikers. I've heard Bashir, I've heard Bicker, but I like Bisher. These are the African reed fishes and the gars. They have these they look like almost triangular or diamond shaped scales. And anyone who's caught a gar, these things are hard as heck, right? They're very tough scales. Placoid scales are tough too, but this is sort of the throwback. The sharks might have lost bone to remain mobile, but this is still pretty heavy armor. Same with this. This is pretty heavy armor, right? These things are very thick. Instead of dentine, they're made of a compound called ganoine. And they're also very similar to the very large bony plates on sturgeons. So less derived fishes, even though they got rid of those bony shields like we see in the ostracoderms, they still contain a pretty heavy set of armor. Whether it be teeth, like enamel is pretty tough. Enamel and dentine are pretty tough compounds. Or ganoine, which is pretty tough too. When we see the more derived fishes, we see what are called cycloid or ctenoid. The C here is silent, ctenoid scales. And the ctenoid scales have these little prickly teeth on them. Whereas the cycloid scales are smooth. They're just sort of round and smooth here. These are the more derived fishes. These are even lighter weight armor. So when we're talking about becoming a predator with jaws and being able to swim fast and be mobile, that's sort of the trend here. Get rid of the heavy armor, and instead of having to use armor to protect you, you're able to swim away, or you're just able to eat a predator. Something that's going to eat you, you eat it first. So that's sort of what the strategy was. So when we look at ctenoid scales, these things are primarily in derived fishes in the perciforms. Like anyone who's caught a bluegill or a largemouth bass, if you hold that fish and you peel away or get some of the mucus or slime coat off of it, the fish feels rough. It's because of these tenai. Because this part of the scale here is like a shingle. There's other scales covering it, and this little wedge is what's exposed to the surface of the fish. Cycloid scales, on the other hand, are smooth. So anyone's grabbed a goldfish or a carp, they appear smooth, and that's because they don't have these little tenai. And so this is a lighter weight armor, but it still provides some kind of protection. It's just not as heavy as this or this. And some fish, they don't even have scales. Hagfish doesn't care. It's tumbling around on the bottom. It's got slime. It doesn't need this. Catfish also. Ictaluridae, they don't have scales. Lampreys, for the most part, don't, and the paddlefish doesn't. So some fishes don't even have scales. They've lost it entirely. So this is the level of heavy armor to light armor. And so fishes have all these different strategies. But a lot of times the idea here evolutionarily was, let's become mobile and fast. Okay? So that's that. Here are these claspers. In the males of the chondrichthyes, there's this intermittent organ used to inseminate the female, and they're extensions of the pelvic fins. So here they are. Here are your two pelvic fins. There are the two claspers. And they're species specific. Some of these things have these structures on them. And the idea is if that can't fit inside of the female of the other species, then it prevents hybridization. And so it allows the sharks to sort of, conspecifically mate. And some of these things have like papillae at the tips and things like that. Some of them are relatively long, like this one. Some are relatively short. There's a whole variety of these things. And so you can always tell then a chondrichthy fish, you can tell the gender of a chondrichthyes fish based upon presence of the claspers, that's a male. If they don't have these, then it's a female. So these are, again, used for internal fertilization. So here we go. Modes of reproduction. Some sharks or some chondrichthyes, about 43% of them are oviparous, meaning that they lay eggs, right? Anyone seen these on the beach? These are called mermaids' purses. This is a clear nose skate here, Raja, on the top, and then a chain dogfish on the bottom. Sometimes they have hooks. And again, just like the hagfish eggs, these hooks sort of allow them to hook onto stuff so they don't get carried away and get, like, for instance, swept up onto a beach where they die. Some of them have these little long curly things, again, to sort of attach to some kind of substrate. But inside of there is a tiny skate. So you can find these sometimes washed up on the beach. So about 43% of the chondrichthyes fishes are what we call oviparous, egg-laying. 57, almost 2/3, have internal fertilization and are viviparous, live bearers. They give birth to live young. Some of them actually have what are called uterine villi, which is like some kind of association that the embryos have with the female uterus that nourishes them. Other ones don't. And some have what are called trophonemata, which are actually a placenta. The sharks are literally connected to the mother inside via the equivalent of an umbilical cord. And this functions like a placenta. So just like a mammal. Some have what's called oophagy, where they literally eat each other in the womb. So before they're even born, they're eating each other. That's a predatory animal, I'll tell you that. And I got a video here I'm going to show. So of the type 1s here, some have what is called extended, or most have extended oviparity, meaning that they literally just lay an egg like this outside of the body and it goes off. But some actually have retained oviparity, which you probably have heard of as ovoviviparous, meaning that the eggs are fertilized and retained inside of the mother's body, but there is no association with the female uterus or anything like that. Literally, the embryos just hang out inside the eggs until they hatch, and when they do, then they come out. And so there's a lot of what we call paternal care here. The female actually shark takes care of the offspring. So a very intensive energy component here. So here's a video of the oophagy, and I just like to also say here's a tiny juvenile shark. Baby sharks are called pups. So a baby shark is a pup. So when they come out, they're called pups. And so here's a video about oophagy. We don't want this. We want this. Here's a video about oophagy. So can the remote people see this or no?
No, we just see you right now.
You just see me. What about this?
Now you got it.
Now we got it. All right, so here is, your minds are going to be blown. Watch this. what that right there is a predator. So, does anyone ever know that? Yeah, the sharks actually do that inside. So when they say they're ready to go, when they come out, that means they're ready to go. They've already been trained and they are ready to eat stuff. So they're not very defenseless. So that's one of the strategies there. And so from here on out, I'm just going to refer back to this table here as type 1 reproduction or type 2A, 2B, 2C, or 2D. And really, the idea here is there oophagy? Is it live bearing or egg laying? And are they oophagic? Do they eat each other? So we're going to dive in now into the different taxa. Bunch of options there. So elasmobranch distributions. Most elasmobranchs are marine. In shallow and deep waters, Arctic, subtropical, and tropic waters. Really, they're distributed across the earth, just marine, not freshwater. 880 total species of sharks, rays, and skates. And if you look at the breakdown of where these animals are living, the marine shelf, 55%, including some freshwater, like for instance, the bull shark. You know, if you look at the distribution here, it's going up the Mississippi River, for instance. The slope, for instance, 35%, including the sand tiger, live on these continental shelves or the continental slopes. So along the coastlines, typically the coastlines are quite productive, and so a lot of the animals or fishes live around there. Open ocean, about 2%. Thresher sharks. So if we look at the thresher sharks distribution in light pink here, we see it's all across the Atlantic Ocean here, for instance, right here, and the Pacific Ocean here. And of course, the dark red areas are where they are really frequenting. So again, kind of like on the coastal areas. And then mixed. 8% of the sharks or elasmobranchs, like the great white shark, goes wherever it wants. So here is its distribution. It pretty much is wherever it wants to go. So these things are widely adapted to a lot of different environments, both continental shelf and open ocean, anywhere from tropical to Arctic waters. So they're well adapted across the globe. So you can see them. When we look at filter feeding, this is kind of ridiculous. We just spent all this time talking about things like the advanced jaws being designed. We lost all this armor. We're fast. We're predators. We're eating stuff. And we've got filter feeding sharks. So after these things evolve jaws to eat other stuff, they always have an evolutionary throwback. Let's go ahead and try that thing we used to do before. Let's go ahead and start filter feeding again. And actually, it didn't happen just once, it happened twice. So among the elasmobranchs, we have the family Mobulidae, the manta rays, and then Cetorhinidae, the basking sharks. These things evolved filter feeding 2 different times. And if you look at the mouths here are quite different. And so twice they actually reinvented filter feeding. So apparently it worked. So if we look here at developing a grasping terminal mouth, we then develop some kind of suction grasping, Rajid is ray-like, feeding apparatus. And so this can either go into a cutting kind of squalomorph, which is like a cookie cutter shark, saw sharks, things like that. Or we can use this suction grasping to do suction crushing. So Miliobatiformes are things like stingrays. These things swim around and pick up shellfish and pulverize them. So very powerful bony plates as jaws. And that's sort of why the manta ray looks kind of like this. It's got these kind of elongated mouth plates, but instead of crushing shellfish, they decided, let's just do a little bit of filter feeding. So these things are eating plankton. Now, the basking sharks sort of took this grasping-like mouth, and then it turned into a gouging carchariniform. Carcharinus is like the megalodon or the great white or whatever. The lambid sharks, the requiem sharks, things like this. The crushing, the triachid is the benthic sharks, like the ground sharks, things like that. And then they decided to say, let's do this suction crushing kind of feeding, but instead let's adapt it to filter feeding with a giant mouth, right? So these things had a very big gouging mouth loaded with teeth for biting stuff. We then evolved over here. These are things like the nurse sharks or rectolobiform, the nurse sharks. And then they said, let's do filter feeding as well. So 2 different times filter feeding arose among the chondrichthyans after they got out of all that. You know, we just had Romer come along and say, let's make a jaw so we can do some crazy stuff with it. And they said, we're gonna go right back to filter feeding. Kind of cool. You see this happen in evolution a lot. So this is sort of a reinventing the old strategy because it works and it does. So elasmobranchs are not all carnivorous predators. Sometimes they are filter feeders. But we're here to learn about these. Look at this. You see the jaw here? This thing is a herbivore. You know, no one believes me? No, these teeth, really, they're designed to eat vegetation. I mean, look at this. This is aquatic vegetation is what it's eating. I'm just kidding, guys. There's no way. This thing is eating meat. So we look at how the actual jaws of the shark work. Last time I told you about the 3 different types of jaw suspension. And we talked about the sharks have amphistylic jaws. So what that means is I told you that the jaw can literally sort of move around inside of the head, independent of the skull. And that's exactly how a shark bites. So this is from your book. It says normal resting position, boom, A. That's what a shark just looks like cruising around. Then if it wants to bite, the snout is lifted like this here. The snout is lifted and opens the gape of the mouth. And you can see that's a pretty large gape of the mouth right there. And then when it bites down, the first thing it does is its jaws bite first. Its jaws are literally not connected directly to the skull because they got this cartilage supporting the lower jaw. And there's a little hinge here attached to the base of the skull. So the jaws bite first, and then the head comes down, it slams down. So it does a double bite, if you will. It's like a trap. So the jaws bite first, and then the head clamps down. So whenever these sharks bite, they almost bite twice. So if we go here to our video, nope. This one right here. So can the online folks see this one?
Yes.
Excellent. So let's look at, actually, you know what? Let's do this one first. Let's just show the jaws. So watch this shark biting here, and you'll see what I'm talking about. The jaws are going to close first, and then the head's going to come down to clamp it shut. See that? This jaw is completely loose, and it moves before the skull does. Crazy. What that does is it gives these animals a lot of leverage. They have a lot of leverage to bite. They bite very strong. That's why they can cut through stuff. So the jaws come closed first, and then the head will snap down to finish the job. Like that. And so that's what we're talking about, that amphistylic jaw. A little bit different than a largemouth bass, right? The largemouth bass has got that the different jaw mechanism. The sharks have this jaw mechanism. But it does its job. It allows them to do things like this. Now watch this. If this one loads. Reading view is not available. What is that? Oh man, really? You gotta do one of these. I try to have all these preloaded so we don't have to deal with Why isn't it not letting me? We're just going to do this, and we're just going to do this again. This one right here. All right. Can we see this? Giddy up. All right, so you see that biting allows them to do that. Very strong biting mechanism. So the jaws are very powerful hinges. Sharks have very good sensory systems, and here are some of the ranges of their senses. For instance, they have these, they can detect electroperception at short distance, like 50 centimeters, so directly in front of the head. Electrical currents, of course, they can taste, touch, and they can, understand things like temperature and things like that. The ampullae of Lorenzini is what allows them to detect electrical currents. So they don't have to, they can literally feel a muscle twitch and sense that. That's why a lot of times you see these sharks hunting and they can find stuff buried in the sand. They don't even have to see it or smell it. They can just feel a muscle twitch and they can attack it. Vision, tens of meters in front of the animal. Lateral line, again, this pressure, really what they're doing is they're feeling sound. They're feeling sound waves along the entire length of their body. Olfaction, they can smell, you hear these stories about a shark can smell a drop of blood in the water 100-something meters away. And then hearing, they can hear very well, several kilometers actually. And this part of the reason is their body is not very dense. And so the sound waves pass easily through them. And then they have the hearing apparatus is either through the lateral line here, and they've also got open canals in their head where the sound waves from the water goes right into their inner ear. So they get a very good sense of hearing, actually. So any questions there? Also, online, can you hear me? I had to switch the batteries out of the microphone.
Yep.
Sweet. Crisis averted. There's electrical, so these electrical senses here, these ampullae of Lorenzini, they can detect electrical currents. You ever see these sharks, you see these little pits here on the nose. Oh, I am gonna remind myself to do this. These little pits along the head, these spots. These are little jelly-filled pores, and the jelly is electrically conductive. That means electrical signals can come in here and they can sense those electrical currents. These are unique to elasmobranchs, right? Other fishes do not have this. They might be able to sense electrical currents, but they do not have ampullae of Lorenzini. They're short range, so a few centimeters. Really, the shark uses its other senses like smell and sight and the lateral line to get close to stuff, and then it will use the ampullae of Lorenzini for like the short-term follow-up. And so these pits are usually concentrated in the head, and they can detect very small currents. One 1/100000th of a volt. So like that's literally just a fish buried in the sand, just breathing, not even swimming around. Just like literally, if it twitches a muscle, it can sense it. They can literally detect muscle contractions. And so that's how they can detect prey that are hidden or buried. And when we talk about the senses of fishes later in the course, I'll actually show videos where you can like turn on an electrical pulse in a tank and a stingray will immediately swim right over to it, especially if it's emitting a frequency that's similar to that of a prey item. They'll go right over to it. So we'll show some videos about that. But these things are pretty ridiculous when it comes to the ability to sense those things. So that's what they elasmobranchs in general. So let's talk about subclass holocephali. Whole cephali, head, the whole-headed fish. And again, this has to do with that holocephalic jaw. So I just told you that most elasmobranchs have 5 pairs or 5 gill slits, except bony fishes have 4. Well, guess what? There's always an exception. The holocephali actually have 4 pairs of gills. So they've got 4 slits here, 4 gill arches on the side. Even though they're an elasmobranch, or even though they're a chondrichthyes, they actually have 4, not 5. So it sets them apart from the elasmobranch sharks. There is no spiracle. Again, that's a pretty good characteristic. So there is no spiracle here. You'd see it right here by the eye, you don't see it. They actually have an operculum, which is more closely what bony fishes have. They have this slit here. And so they don't have these 5 or 4 slits along the side. They have one operculum, which is an X-current siphon. So water goes in the mouth, over the gills, and out through the operculum. They have very large eyes. So what might that tell you? These things live on the bottom. They're benthic. And so they live in very low light conditions. So they have very large eyes. No scales, no placoid scales. These things have a smooth epidermis. There's no scales on this skin here. Second, 2 dorsal fins. 1, 2. Then this first one is erect. And the second one is sort of depressed here. This is actually it sort of sometimes can be subdivided here, but the second dorsal fin's like this. The first one's an erect one, so you can sort of see it right here as well. Sometimes there is a venomous spine that precedes the first dorsal fin. So these things can have a venomous spine here, right here. This top most prominent spine is oftentimes venomous, kind of like you'd see in a catfish. They have wing-like fins for very slow swimming. I'll show a video here. They swim almost like a bird flies. Long, flexible rat tail. This is where they get their common name, the rat fishes or the rat tails. There's no ribs and no stomach. They actually literally take food in and it goes right into the intestine. And they've got teeth consolidated into grinding and crushing plates. So they really pulverize shellfish, mollusks, and things like this. They pulverize this stuff and then go put it right into the intestine. The male, like other ones, have claspers and they're oviparous. These things lay eggs. And the eggs hatch as miniature adults, direct development. There's no larvae. Found very deep, 8,000 feet deep. So these are deep water fish. And so they're kind of cool looking. And so if we look at then, here is a rat fish swimming. So we can see this, here's a rat fish swimming, or a rat tail as I like to call them, the chimeras. So you look at how slow this thing is swimming and watch its fins, it's flapping them almost like it's a bird. See that? And so they're in the very bottom of the ocean where it's really cold. So a lot of times there's not a lot of food availability down there, so there's a lot of energy conservation going on. And also, that's part of the reason why they have big eyes is there's not a lot of light down there, but there's no real hurry to go anywhere. And so they use these fins for that gentle swimming right along the bottom, and they feed in the benthos, primarily on mollusks. And so that's the life of the chimera, the rat-tailed fish, or the ratfish. They're pretty cool, very ancient things. These things have not changed a lot in a long time. And again, this dorsal fin here, this dorsal spine might be venomous. So that is the chimeras. So, any questions there? Holocephali. So I'd look at subclass holocephali. We're not going to have, the families here, but holocephali are the rat tails. And so these are your characteristics. So pay attention to your key term here and then your characteristics there. So now we're going to start talking about the elasmobranch families. Here's our pointer. There we go. So, class Chondrichthyes. Elasmobranchi, order, here we go. Family Gynglymostomatidae, the nurse sharks. Now, gynglymostoma means hinged mouth. Look at these flaps here on the sides of the mouth, this hinged mouth, right? Gynglymostoma, hinged mouth. So Gynglymostomatidae are the nurse sharks. Serratum means to have cirri, so these little tiny teeth here. And so I'm giving you the family name here, Gynglymostomatidae, whatever, nurse sharks. Gynglymostoma is the genus, serratum is an example species. So this is the actual nurse shark. Nostrils bear long barbels, cirri, and then they have these tiny teeth here. There's a small spiracle behind each of the eyes, max length about 10.5 feet. Diet consists primarily of crustaceans, mollusks, tunicates, sea snakes, other fish, stingrays, things like that. There's 3 species in this family, and you can sort of see their distribution here is in red. So we see them here in the Pacific, but we see them in the Atlantic here, up along the North Carolina coast. So these things here are in the Gulf of Mexico and in the Atlantic here in North America. And so Gynglymostoma is what we're looking here. So these are the nurse sharks. And they've got these sensory cirri. These cirri here are for tasting or smelling. So they're actually, these things sort of fish around in the muck looking for things like this to eat. And they use these things then to detect those prey items. So they're sensory fibers. And they've got these little tiny teeth there then to process these food items. All right. Rhynchodontidae. Rhynchodontidae is the next family. This is a monotypic family. And what monotypic means is there's only one. There's only one type of these, one species. That's all we got. Rhynchodon. Typus is the whale shark. That's the one example. Now I'll tell you this. Rhyn is a snout. It means nose. Codon, again, dent. Dentistry. This is the snout tooth shark. Largest of all fishes, 60 feet long. So of all living fishes right now, this is the largest, the whale shark. Rhynchodontidae. There are 3 prominent ridges that run down the side of this fish right here. 1, 2, and 3. And so they've got 3 ridges on each side. And there's a terminal mouth. Look at this mouth. The very large mouth here is open. 5 huge gill clefts. So this thing has the 5 gill slits, and you can sort of actually, you can see light coming in here. That's light from coming outside into this inside of the buccal cavity of the shark. And so these are very large gill slits. So what does that tell you it might do? It filter feeds. Again, we got this filter feeding adaptation. So the largest of all the current fishes is, in fact, a filter feeder. It has a very tiny eye to see tiny plankton. I'm just kidding. It has a tiny eye. It's not really looking for a lot of fast swimming stuff. It's literally just swimming around, filter feeding. And so it really just has to have eyes to get away from stuff that might eat it. It also has a spiracle. It has retained oviparity. The egg case is 12 inches long. So it's the largest fish you'd expect. The eggs are 12 inches long. And so what that means is there's internal fertilization, but it retains the eggs inside the female body cavity. And when they hatch, then they come out of the female. High fecundity to other sharks. You know, you could have 300 eggs or fertilized embryos inside of a 35-foot long, 17-ton female. So again, they're pretty big fish. And here they are, tropical, warm, temperate marine distribution, epipelagic, right? For these things to do their filter feeding stuff, they're usually out here in the open ocean. And so the red here indicates where their distribution is. So I'd look at things, monotypic family, prominent ridges, largest fish, et cetera, filter feeder, things like that. And remember, Rhynchodontidae, the snout-toothed shark. So I've got a video here to show some whale shark feeding on plankton. Look at that. They just do this all day long. Look at the tiny eye right there. Look at those large gill slits. You can count them, there's 5. It's a typical elasmobranch, 5 of them. And these are those ridges along the side. And when we say the word elasmobranch, like the elastic gills, that's what we're talking about right there. They're they're rubbery. But look at the eyes on that. That tiny eye there, and there's a little tiny spiracle right behind it. So yeah, spiracle, eye. So there, the whale shark. Rhynchodontidae is a family. That's the word to remember right there. All right, any questions there? Rhynchodontidae. Triachidae, the hound sharks. Again, we're talking about Chondrichthyes, elasmobranchs, family, Triachidae. I'll give you an example here. Mustelus, which really means weasel. Canis, so the weasel dog. Weasel, smooth dogfish, right? So that's your example species, just to give you an idea of what you might find, for instance, in North Carolina, but really the word for the exam, Triachidae. 2 nearly equal dorsal fins. Let me put this back up. Whoop, there we go. Right here. If you look here, these 2 dorsal fins are almost the same height. Look at and it's got a very flat head and oval cat-shaped eyes. They're very characteristic. The spiracle is present here behind the eye, and they have flat teeth. Right? Their diet is large crustaceans, fish, and some mollusks, so shellfish. Now, they have both type 2A and type 2D reproduction from that first table, so these are live bearers with some kind of a placental contribution there to the offspring. 39 species in the family. Maximum length is about 8 feet. And the family is found in marine, cool, and temperate to tropical waters worldwide. So again, we see here the Gulf of Mexico, down into the Caribbean, to the northern part of South America, and then up there into the mid-Atlantic of the North America. And so you can find these things distributed throughout this range in proximity to North Carolina. And so these are some pictures of these things here. The smooth dogfish. Cat-like eyes, 2 equal size dorsal fins, flat teeth eating crustaceans on the bottom. And so here's sort of the mouth there looking at those flat teeth. There's not a lot of sharp teeth in here. Okay, So this is family Triachidae, the hound sharks, or the smooth hounds, weasel hounds. Ooh, this one here, Carcharinidae, the requiem sharks. Now, these things primarily eat vegetation. I'm just kidding. Don't write that down. These things here, look at this. The diet consists of bony fish, small sharks, turtles, birds, dolphins, terrestrial mammals, humans, crustaceans, echinoderms, stingrays. Anything. They eat anything they want. Family Carcharinidae, the requiem sharks. Your example here is Carcharinus lucus, the bull shark. Carcharinus, rhinus means again snout or nose. Carca means sharp or jagged. So the jagged snouts, if you will, the bull shark here. Blade-like teeth. Oh, no spiracle. There's no spiracle here is a good characteristic. They have round eyes, no barbels. Type 2D and 2A reproduction. About 50 species in the family. Maximum length 24 feet for the tiger shark. And so this thing includes like the bull sharks and the tiger sharks. Family, marine, occasionally freshwater. Look at here. This is for the bull shark. Again, up the Mississippi River there, that little red line. They can come into freshwater. But generally speaking, they're here in the tropical to subtropical distribution and oftentimes along the coasts. Worldwide. And so Carcharinidae, the requiem sharks, pretty much eating lots of different things that live. So their diet is very much, I wouldn't even say piscivorous, I would say carnivorous, because these things don't really care. They eat a lot of stuff. So the Carcharinidae is a good family to know there, the requiem sharks. So any questions there? Here's the next one. I like this family. Family Sphyrnidae. Sphyrna in Greek means hammer. So the hammerhead sharks. So your example here is a scalloped hammerhead, Sphyrna lewini. And here is the scalloped hammerhead. The lateral expansion of the head varies. In the next slide, I'm going to show you a couple different shovel-like heads that they've got. Sometimes they're shovel-like, sometimes they're wing-like. But they've always got these very odd heads. And I'm going to tell you this. If you mistake this family for any of these other ones, I'm just going to tell you, go home. These things, Sphyrnidae, are very distinct with this hammerhead, right? So when we talk about lateral expansion of the head, that's what we're talking about. The eyes are on the side here. That's pretty much the characteristic you got. 8 species, max length 20 feet. Diet, squid, fish, octopuses, crustaceans, other sharks, and stingrays. These things actually do eat a lot of other sharks. And we'll talk about how they do that in the next slide. Family, marine, warm, temperate, and tropical oceans. So look at this. All through the Gulf, all up the coast. Anyone's been swimming, these are out there. I'll be honest, Hawaii, here. When I was out at the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology, we were out there swimming, and it's a hammerhead breeding ground out in the Pacific. And we're out there snorkeling off the reef. And you always have to check behind you when you're swimming to make sure there isn't a 20-foot hammerhead shark coming up behind you to try to eat you. So my wife is deathly afraid of sharks. So what did I do? I said, let's go snorkeling. And she says, are there sharks in there? Nah, there's no sharks here. So we get in the water. Sure enough, there's a shark in the water. And she didn't go snorkeling after that. But this was the breeding ground is out here in the Pacific for a lot of the hammerhead sharks. And no, the sharks are not, they did not bite me or anything. They were there though, off the reef. You could see them. They're actually pretty magnificent. So the hammerhead shark is here. So when we look at the hammers, there's lots of different types here. So here's a smooth hammerhead in panel A, the scalloped hammerhead panel B, the great hammerhead C, and here is the bonnet head. And so sometimes these are sort of hook-like, Sometimes they're hammerhead-like. And so there's lots of variations here, but really this is what we call a lateral expansion of the head. And it's a very diagnostic feature for family Sphaeridae. These are the potential adaptations. So if I was studying for an exam question, what, for instance, what is the purpose of the hammer on a hammerhead shark? Well, here are some ideas. We don't know for sure, but here are some. First is it could be a cephalofoil. So it helps provide lift. I told you that elasmobrachts do not have a swim bladder, which helps with buoyancy. This could be allowing them, as they swim through the water, to give them lift, right? And we'll talk about dynamic lift later when we talk about buoyancy. But it could be a cephalofoil. It helps with lift and swimming efficiency. The second is it could be vision. Increases peripheral vision by sweeping the hammer to the left and to the right as it's swimming. It can pretty much see its own tail. So it can see all the way behind it. So it's got 360 vision all around. So increased surface area. We talked about these ampullae of Lorenzini that are all on the head. Well, these things have ampullae too. And the whole cephalofoil is covered with them. So maybe it enhances their electrical reception. Because these things are eating a lot of stuff on the bottom. Squids, octopuses, crustaceans, and things like that. Other sharks, actually a lot of stingrays they eat. So a lot of stuff they eat is on the bottom, which then leads us to the fourth one, is it's a weapon. The sharks will actually hit other sharks with these heads, and they'll pin them. So for instance, it can be used to pin a ray to the bottom while it's biting it. So literally, this flat margin of the head, it will pin the ray down and then bite it with its mouth. So it holds it there. And so here are 4 possible uses of this ridiculous looking hammerhead and what they might be doing with it. And so those are some of the uses there of the hammerhead. So any questions there? But I'd say that that's the biggest diagnostic characteristic here. So with that, here's another video. These is shark aggregations. All right, and the very beginning of that video, they talked about how they're launching their base station was Coconut Island. That's exactly where I was in Hawaii. That's the HMB, the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology. I actually was wearing the shirt for that place last Thursday, I believe. So we were out there doing research there at that institute as well. So that was their shark footage, putting cameras on other sharks. So here's your story that we've been talking about sharks. Any questions online? So here's a story here. Each year there's 50 to 70 confirmed shark attacks, right? And 5 to 15 shark attack fatalities around the world. Shark attacks have risen over the years, but not because sharks are more aggressive, but it's really because there's more people swimming in the water, right? So the higher the likelihood of encountering a shark, then that increases the likelihood of doing so. So most shark attacks occur less than 100 feet from shore, and mainly they are around popular beaches in North America. So places like Florida and Hawaii. Exactly, when you go snorkeling in Hawaii, remember that. There's no sharks there. Australia, South Africa. There's 375 species of sharks, and only a few are considered dangerous. And we're talking about these requiem sharks. The great white, for instance, Carcharodon carcharias, the tiger, and then the bull, Carcharodon lucus. These are the three ones that are most responsible for shark attacks. But I also showed you that the bull shark pretty much eats anything. So there you have it. Over 17,000 people die each year from falling. That's a 1 in 218 chance over your lifetime, compared to a 1 in 11 million chance of being killed by a shark here per year. So what that means is you have a greater chance of being killed in a car accident while driving to the beach than you do by being bitten by a shark while in the water at the beach. So if you're scared about being killed at the beach, just don't get in your car and drive there, right? It's probably not gonna be a shark. So most surfers are attacked by sharks that are paddling on a surfboard. The underside of it is white. And when they're paddling, they look like a sea turtle. And a lot of sharks actually eat sea turtles. And so that's one of the reasons why they also oftentimes attack surfers. So sharks mistake humans for actual prey items. They really don't eat. It's not their prey of choice. Human beings are not. And so with that, I'll show you a video of a shark attack. Is anyone here sick of or a weak stomach? All right. There's not a lot of blood in it. It's really not a human shark attack either. I have to mute it though. I'm going to mute it for the sake of recording here because there are some choice words in it. And so what's going on here is this guy has a fish on the line, a shark. And I think it's a bull shark is what the guy says when he's commenting on it. So you can sort of see the bull shark there below the surface. They're reeling it in. And it's a reasonable size shark. Here, you can sort of see he's bringing it to the surface. There it is. Now watch behind it. Its tail is to the right. See that? Boom. That right there, that shark just took that other one out. And so whenever they see something like that, that's in distress, or it looks like it's not swimming right, that's always something that's easy target. And so sharks a lot of times will look for erratic swimming behavior, and that's what they will do. They'll attack that. And so that little bull shark there got bit by a bigger one, and it took his tail completely off again. So when we talk about the power of the jaws, those are the blade-like cutting teeth we're talking about. So took the caudal fin of that shark right off. And so with that, that's all of the videos that I have for today and all of the story. So do we have any questions from here, or I guess it's at home? The away crowd, the online crowd. Any questions online? So while we were here today, I'm gonna go ahead and pause this and stop recording right now. And I got one more comment to say. All right, so stop recording.